So this is the first week of Black History Month, and I want to just say outright how proud I am that we are celebrating Black History Month as part of the liturgical spiritual life of the cathedral. You know, we also observe other moments of Black history throughout the year because Black history is our history, because cathedral is black, white, brown, many cultures, many races, and so Black history is part of all of our collective history. We're proud to be a mixed group, not as mixed as we could be, but mixed nevertheless, mixing. And so we observed in August, I know, a whole month of emphasis on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. But I think this is a timely time for us to continue to keep African American history, civil rights history before us, because it's a time of great social and spiritual change. If you want to see a modern example of what we are examining on Wednesday night in the Bible study, in the sermon series called Revolutionary Religion, looking at the book of Exodus, if you want to look at a modern example of how what God did then, God is doing still, you can look at the African American struggle for self-determination and for civil rights, a movement that also has given birth to the women's movement, that gave birth to the gay, lesbian liberation movement, and to other kinds of liberation movements. God is evident and active in human history, and one way we see that is through the celebration of Black History Month. So it'll have a different emphasis each week. I will draw occasional examples that I think make in modern time what point Jesus or whatever other biblical passage we're looking at was being made 2,000 years ago. I really do believe that what God did then, God is still doing. And if you want tangible proof of God's passion for human beings, you can find it anywhere that liberation is taking place. James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time, I want to urge everyone in the cathedral to read it. I think a book can change a group of people. The Bible changes people. James Baldwin's book, The Fire Next Time, he wrote at the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. He wrote it first as a letter to his godson, his nephew. He said, this African-American gay social critic, artist, novelist, poet, you know and I know that the country is celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too soon. And his words ring true 51 years later. So I want to urge everyone to read this book, The Fire Next Time. It's arguments about what liberation should look like are salient today. He writes to his nephew, please try to be clear, dear James, through the storm which rages about your youthful head today, about the reality which lies behind the words acceptance and integration. There is a difference between acceptance and integration. And I think that we're in that point right now as a society where we're trying to live into what real integration means. Someday, maybe we'll be able to point to Cathedral of Hope's important role in history in integrating the GLBT community into broader society, and how we enriched and brought to the table a variety of gifts. But we're not at that point yet in history. It's still a little too soon to call the revolution accomplished. So Black History Month, I hope, will be an occasion for us to look at our own liberation struggles too. I know that until we have continued to draw connections between racism and sexism and homophobia, that we will not fully experience the richness of the spirituality that God has implanted within us to achieve something new together that we couldn't have achieved before. Part of what is influencing me, I know, right now is Thursday night. Lynn Walters prodded me to go to North Haven United Methodist Church, where Dr. Frederick Haynes was speaking. He's the pastor of Friendship Baptist Church here in Dallas. Friendship West Baptist Church, I think is the name of it. And I'm sure many of you know of this church, have heard of it. Large African-American church here in the city. And he had been invited to speak at North Haven Church. in North Dallas, which is a largely white neighborhood, and it meant something that he was there. There were very few African American people in the North Haven audience, and to talk about what they could do together to change the nature of racial relations in the city of Dallas as Christians. And I was there. It wasn't my party, so I couldn't really participate as a host, but I was welcomed there. And I wanted to say, include Cathedral of Hope, too, in this conversation, conscious that race and homophobia, racism and homophobia, sometimes make it difficult for us to work together. But church, even if there is resistance to Cathedral of Hope's racial justice work because of homophobia, I hope we will persist in it. One thing that I've been thinking lately is that our society is focusing on GLBT issues as an excuse for not dealing with the more serious issue of race in our society. And I believe that God is calling us, with what we have learned collectively and historically from our GLBT experience, to apply that to a broader liberation project. We know something, and we have something to learn, and that's a perfect place for God to do something with us that has never been done before. These scriptures today, I think, form a good foundation for the kind of work that I believe God is calling us to do. Two summary statements, one from the Hebrew Bible, one from the New Testament, each of them summary statements, manifestos about what's important about religion and what's important about human life. You know, sometimes we have the opportunity to make statements like this, and when we do, they're clarifying for us. They're like a mission statement for who we are and who we want to be. Walt Whitman, in his poem, Song of the Open Road, I think wrote a manifesto about what's important about life and spirituality. He says, afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me, the long brown path before me, leading wherever I choose. From this hour, freedom. From this hour, I ordain myself, loosed of limits and imaginary lines, going where I list, my own master, total and absolute, listening to others and considering well what they may say, pausing, searching, receiving, contemplating, gently but with undeniable will, divesting myself of the holds that would hold me. I inhale great draughts of space. The east and the west are mine, and the north and the south are mine. I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness. All seems beautiful to me. I can repeat over to men and women, you have done such good to me. I would do the same to you. I will recruit for myself and for you as I go. I will scatter myself among men and women as I go. I will toss the new gladness and roughness among them. Whoever denies me, it shall not trouble me. Whoever accepts me, he or she shall be blessed and shall bless me. This is what Walt Whitman declared as a summary statement of what was important. And I bet that we have summary statements we could make too. Each of us, the elevator speech that sometimes people talk about in development circles that I've worked in professionally in the past. You were often told, okay, you're about to enter an elevator with the biggest donor in the world who will fund your project if by the time you get off the elevator, you're able to persuade him in one breath or persuade her in one breath why they should support your project, the elevator speech. I was asked to give one once in front of a group of people, of other development professionals, and they would say, tell people why they didn't tell you in advance what you'd do. And it was a kind of a mixed group of people. And fundraisers can be a little conservative. But I was there representing the seminary I was working at, and they said, do your elevator speech. And I said, you should give to Pacific School of Religion because it's the gayest seminary in the whole world. You had thought I'd killed the room. But fortunately, the trainer said A+, because whoever donor hears that, they're never going to forget it. And you were very clear about who you are and what you stand for. That's what the kind of speech, a kind of manifesto that I believe is found in these two scripture passages. One from the prophet Micah that Connor read for us with such tremendous devotion and inspiration. I wanted to sign up right then and there. When the God is arguing with the people of Israel, and they're saying to him, to God, saying to her, deeply ingrained habits, saying to the divine spirit, they're saying, well, how about if we do this, or if we do that? And demonstrating to God that they could major in minor things in the area of religion and miss the point. God said, I don't care about your long, boring worship services. I don't care about your weird habits that you think please me, but have more to do with you than with me. I grew up in a church where this was very important. You could not eat before you went to Holy Communion. So it was a sign of great piety to pass out at the noon Mass. Some people did it every week. I'm not convinced that that was the point of the spiritual practice. It's an example of sometimes we major in minor things in order to not avoid dealing with more complex issues. What does God say about this kind of religious practice in the prophet Micah? God says, look, just love justice, love tenderly, and walk humbly together. It's not that hard. We can remember those things. You may not be able to remember when you can eat, what you can eat before you go to this or that, or who can participate in this or that, or what rule. But you can remember to seek justice, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly. These are all, God says, that's all I require. The rest is paperwork, not important. But if you can do these things, then you're doing it. Then no matter how imperfect the product is, the process will bring liberation if you're doing those things. Jesus has been gathering a group of people for several weeks or months. We're not sure of the timeline at this point in Matthew's gospel. We've been following the gospel of Matthew since Christmas. Jesus goes around, he gets baptized, he goes to the desert, then he starts teaching. He goes around healing their diseases. He goes around proclaiming liberation. And finally, there's critical mass. There are enough people that they want to hear, what is it that we're signing on for? What are the values of this movement? What do you want from us? What distinguishes us? What will give meaning to what we're doing? And so Jesus goes to a mountainside and there shares this manifesto, this summary statement about what's important in the Jesus movement and Cathedral of Hope. I believe that Jesus could be speaking to us right here, right now. Any good mission statement isn't only particular, it lives larger and invites participation even from beyond those who are most closely associated with it. Jesus, having this first opportunity to address a large group, his first annual meeting, perhaps, chooses to say these things to them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the reign of heaven. In a different version in Luke's gospel, it's blessed are the poor, for theirs is the reign of God. There are reasons why the language is slightly different, but I like both versions. I like the recognition that Jesus says who we are, who is blessed, who is favored, who's been yoked together, called together to make a difference, are those who are poor in spirit. Poor in spirit means you know your need of God. It means you're dissatisfied in your life without a divine presence. There's an emptiness there. And if it can be filled, it will be with God's presence. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who know they need God, for these are the people who will experience divine communion. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. These words are some of the most important life scriptures you could take with you. Why are we in relationship with God? Why are we in spiritual community? Because when we mourn, we can be and will be comforted. When we grieve, when we experience a loss or a disappointment, it can be a person that we lose or a relationship. It can be a dream that we lose. It can be focus that we lose. And when we know it and when we grieve it, Jesus says, the purpose of this movement is that your grief will be honored and your loss will be recognized. And I know this spiritually to be true, that the size of our grief is an indication of how much larger the restoration will be of the joy that comes over time and in communion with God and with each other. Blessed are the meek. Who likes to be called meek? I don't like to be called meek. Meek means this in the first century language of Judaism: those who don't own property. They're the people of the land. That's the actual technical meaning of the word. And then it really did mean 99% of people. Blessed are those who aren't rooted anywhere, who feel small. You will inherit the earth, Jesus says. Now think about this. If these aren't revolutionary words that cause some intersection of religion and politics and that rocks our world, nothing will. If we're really listening, Jesus says, if you feel sidelined, marginalized, like you don't have a home, if you're homeless, if you have lost a feeling of safety, you still will inherit the earth. That means sanctuary awaits you. It means there will be home for you. God does not intend for any person to be left bereft or without an anchor in the world. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. We think of purity sometimes in our modern age in a very narrow way. We associate it with sex somehow. Purity of heart means without guile, without suspicion, without negativity. The pure in heart are the ones who really try to move through the world without an agenda and with an equal concern for others as well as for themselves. Blessed are the pure in heart, the single-focused, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Peacemakers, it's not a metaphor. It means people who actually try to reconcile differences and to do so in a non-violent way. Process counts. How we get there determines what will happen when we get there. Blessed are the peacemakers. These words of Jesus have given inspiration to every social change movement of merit who have ever heard it. The African American Civil Rights Movement, which is only part of Black history, which is only part of what we're celebrating this month, is still one that has been characterized largely by peacemaking and nonviolence, and it finds its roots in these words of Jesus. Others have recognized this as well. Gandhi was very influenced by the Beatitudes. That's what these are called. Blessed are. That's what blessed are is a beatitude. It's a blessing. It's a benediction. It's a favoring. Gandhi said this when he was engaged in a dialogue with the British official who could make a difference in a nonviolent resolution to the resolution of the British colonial presence in India that was marked by great violence. Gandhi was a proponent of nonviolence. He said this: Lord Irwin asked Gandhi what he thought would solve the problems between Great Britain and India. Gandhi picked up a Bible and opened it to the 5th chapter of Matthew and said, when your country and mine shall get together on the teachings laid down by Christ in this Sermon on the Mount, we shall have solved the problem not only of our countries, but those of the whole world. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you for righteousness' sake. This is the hardest beatitude to hear, and yet it is the one that I think is essential to the work of liberation. Blessed are you when you do the right thing, even when you're misunderstood or persecuted for it, but you know you're doing the will of God. Fannie Lou Hamer, 1917 to 1979. She was a Mississippi sharecropper. Eventually, she organized the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was not seated at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. Only the white-only Democratic Party was seated. She organized an integrated delegation that was seated in 1968. But earlier, 1962, she describes how she came to consciousness, what it meant for her to make a decision, even though she was being persecuted for righteousness' sake. She had never voted. She lived on the same plantation that her parents and grandparents had lived on and where one had been a slave. My life had been almost like my mother's because I married a man who sharecropped. We didn't have it easy, and the only way we could ever make it through the winter was because Pap had a little juke joint and we made liquor. That was the only way we made it. I married in 1944 and stayed on the plantation until 1962 when I went to the courthouse in Indianola to register to vote. That happened because I went to a mass meeting one night. Until then, I'd never heard of no mass meetings, and I didn't know that a Negro could register and vote. Bob Moses, Reggie Robinson, Jim Bevel, and James Foreman were some of the workers who ran the meeting. When they asked for those to raise their hands who'd go down to the courthouse the next day to register, I raised mine, had it up as high as I could get it. I guess if I'd had any sense, I'd have been a little scared. But what was the point of being scared? The only thing they could do to me was kill me, and it seemed like they'd been trying to do that a little bit at a time ever since I could remember. She held up her hand so that she could register to vote, and she lost her job and her home and was separated from her children. She was persecuted for righteousness' sake, and she was right. And her example calls us into account to this Sermon on the Mount and say, if she did that, I can live this too. You'll have the opportunity to register to vote in the vestibule after church. If you're not registered to vote, I hope you'll do so. It's a great privilege that we have to do that. Fannie Lou Hamer embodies the best of the Sermon on the Mount. And church, I hope that we will be moved not only by her example, but by the words of Jesus 2,000 years ago, by this idealistic vision that the world looks different when those who are persecuted become liberators. I hope that they will say of us, blessed are they for the work they have done and for the love that they share. Amen.